conventions and courtesies are here for a purpose. They allow us to discuss the most important issues without resorting to personal attacks. That is why I encourage all members to remember our constituents are watching events closely. Let us focus on the big issues, not the personality. I now come to the Deputy Leader for the UQ, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this very important UQ today to ask the Minister for the Cabinet Office if he will make a statement on the functioning of government.
Minister Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the House will be aware, it is widely reported that the Prime Minister is about to make an important statement shortly. I can confirm that it is correct that the Prime Minister will speak shortly. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, and the House and the nation will hear more imminently. In the meantime, the business of government continues, supported in the usual way by our excellent civil service. There will continue to be ministers of the Crown in place, including in all great offices of state. We must continue to serve our country, constituents, and the general public first and foremost. It is our duty now to make sure the people of this country have a functioning government. This is true now more than ever. The civil service is the foundation on which all governments function. The civil service continues to support across all government departments, and the country can be assured that this will always remain the case. I have spoken this morning to the Cabinet Secretary to that effect. Any transitional arrangements have always been made to allow for the business of government to continue. There are constitutional mechanisms in place to make sure that can happen. We await the Prime Minister's statement, but the House should be reassured that the government continues to function in the meantime. Any necessary ministerial vacancies can and will be filled. Other Secretaries of State can make decisions if necessary. There is a rich reserve of people who are both dedicated and talented, and who remain dedicated to serving our country and their constituents. Calmness and professionalism are now required. Our focus now is fully on the stability and continuity of government, Mr. Speaker. Now is the time to serve in the interests of our country, as it always is, and our constituents during the period ahead.
Angela Rayner.
I hate to break it to the Minister, but we don't have a functioning government. It will be good news for the country that the Prime Minister is to announce his resignation. He was always unfit for office. He has overseen scandal, fraud and waste on an industrial scale. But the chaos of the last 3 days is more than just petty Tory infighting. These actions, Mr. Speaker, have serious consequences for the running of our country. In the middle of the deepest cost of living crisis of a generation, with families unable to make ends meet, a dangerous war in Europe threatening our borders, and a possible trade crisis in Northern Ireland, Britain has no functioning government, no ministers in place to pass legislation, bill committees cancelled with no one to run them. Can the Minister confirm whether the 11 committees due to take place today will go ahead? Without ministers, what are the arrangements to pass primary and secondary legislation, and who will answer oral questions? How will this government continue to be democratically held to account? With the new Education Secretary resigning after 36 hours, which must be a record, there is not a single member in the Department of Education. What does this mean for children taking their exams? What does this mean for the impending childcare cost crisis? And our British national security is at risk too, not least because the Prime Minister thinks he can stay on. With the departure of the Northern Ireland Secretary, only 2 ministers are left able to sign security warrants to approve Secret Service use of sensitive powers. What contingency plans are in place to deal with emergencies in the short term, Mr. Speaker? The Prime Minister has said he will stay on as caretaker. How many more months of chaos does this country have to endure? With dozens of ministerial posts unfilled, who on earth will join the Prime Minister's government now? And how will a half-empty cabinet run the country until October? Mr. Speaker, they will try desperately to change the person at the top, but it's the same old Tory party in government.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, and the House and the nation will hear more very shortly, but government and the civil service will continue to function in the meantime. The business of the House statement will be made shortly, and members can ask questions of the Leader of the House of Commons about the matter of the business of this place. But the House will continue to function and government business will continue to function. Other Secretaries of State can deal with issues for other departments constitutionally and legally in necessary circumstances.
John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Without wishing to preempt the Prime Minister's statement, does my right friend agree that he can be proud of a large number of achievements of his government? But can I invite my right friend to preempt the opposition by making clear that Margaret Thatcher, David Cameron, Tony Blair, Theresa May all left office and were succeeded by new leaders and new prime ministers without there being a general election, and that the ship of state sails on?
He is, of course, completely correct.
Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think as I came into the chamber, we were at 59 resignations and counting. It's a remarkable amount of leadership that was shown by the junior ministerial ranks rather than many of the cabinet. Now, I've been longing since I was elected for a cabinet of Remainers, but not necessarily of the kind that we've seen clinging like limpets to a rock. Now, today's announcement from the Prime Minister of his intention to resign comes after 2 years and 348 days in office, which, by supreme irony, is the same number of days as Neville Chamberlain spent in office as Prime Minister. And it's a Prime Minister who achieved Brexit under false pretences, purely as a part of his game to achieve entry to Downing Street. And in that 2 years and 348 days, he's left behind a trail of political chaos, of economic destruction, and leaving any reputation that the UK might have retained as a reliable international partner which stands up for the international rules-based order trampled into the dust. We regularly in Scotland have to put up with patronising lectures about how well our government is performing, yet we have a government in Westminster where we have an education department with no education ministers, where we have 6 police forces in England which are under special measures, and a government that seems utterly paralysed and unable to deal with the major issues of the day. The idea that the Prime Minister can stay on and preside over this till the autumn is utterly risible. Why? How long can this farce be allowed to continue? And how is it right that 300 Tory MPs will get to choose the next Prime Minister over that time, while denying the right of 5.5 million Scots to choose their own future?
The government and the civil service will continue to function in the meantime, as they always have done, and as they have done historically.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, may I thank the Prime Minister for his great service to our nation and also to the people of Ukraine. And I think that people will rue the day that he was forced to resign. But can I say to my right honourable friend that isn't there a lot to be said for having a smaller cabinet, fewer ministers and hardly any parliamentary private secretaries? And can we have a pilot to show how successful that's going to be?
Minister.
Well, he makes a perfectly interesting point, but is somewhat outside the range of my responsibilities.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have here a list of all of the resignations from government. Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't read them out, but there's plenty of tasty quotes in there that will be of use later on. The Minister can't sensibly argue that we have a functioning government when this number of people are missing. There are no people, ministers, to do statutory committees and legislation even as we speak. So what is the way forward? He can't just blather at the dispatch box when the government's disintegrating around him.
The business of the House of Commons will continue, and there are ministers to continue in place. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, but I've spoken to the Cabinet Secretary today, and government and civil service will continue to function in their public duty.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful and have to my right honourable and learned friend and have great sympathy for the position in which he finds himself. He and I have had to take some pretty rough cases in court in the past, and he's drawn a few short straws recently in that regard. And he's done so with dignity, if I may say. But can I ask him just to take this away? Whatever one's views on the Prime Minister, and I accept the importance of the continuity of the government. In fact, there's no need for a general election at all, and plenty of precedent for that. But will he take away the serious question mark that many have as to how long a caretaker Prime Minister can remain in place when there is really concern as to whether the government can be fully and effectively manned? Might it not be in everybody's interest to speed up the transition as much as possibly can be done?
Leader, sorry.
I thank my right honourable and learned friend for his kind remarks. He's right, of course, that a general election is not constitutionally necessary. The Prime Minister was before the liaison committee yesterday and said as much. And we will await events. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement.
Mr. Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, can I say I'm delighted to hear the Minister speaking positively about the role of the civil service. It contrasts rather well with the way in which the government in recent years have done nothing but traduce and undermine their position. But I have to say to the Minister, the Prime Minister could not remain as a caretaker. That is just putting the bull in charge of the china shop. And this is not all about ministers and politicians. This is about our constituents and the public services on which they depend and for which now months this government has been unable to deliver for them properly. That's why they all need to go.
The substantive matter that the honourable gentleman mentions is not a matter for me, but I will say that ministers on this bench and in this House will serve the Crown and serve this country as they always have done.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his statement. I'm glad, that, without wishing to preempt the Prime Minister, I'm glad he has finally come to his senses and will be making this statement shortly. I am very, very sad that the last 48 hours, so many honourable and right honourable colleagues have felt the need to resign from government. If those people will not serve this Prime Minister, could I ask my honourable friend to convey to the Prime Minister that it will not be tenable for him to continue as a caretaker if he cannot fill the ministerial appointments he needs to?
Minister.
I'm sure my friend's comment has been noted.
Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a great relief that we will no longer have a Prime Minister who keeps on saying things that turn out subsequently to be untrue. Will the Minister reassure us that the change will take place in hours, not months? And does the Minister recognise that effective democracy depends on ministers telling the truth?
I can only say that the Prime Minister will make a statement shortly.
Sir Matthew Offord.
By those who enthusiastically supported decisions such as voting for Owen Paterson shows how they were unfit to serve as ministers in the beginning. But the governance of this country cannot be allowed to fail. So I would like to ask, when are these vacancies going to be filled? They must be filled immediately, and we cannot allow decisions to be made by other secretaries of state from other departments. The country deserves better than that.
The government will continue to function, and I have spoken to the head of the civil service to that effect.
Dr. Ruperhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Independent reports that the PM and Tory ministers resigning are entitled to £420,000 of severance pay. At the same time, we've got a government gripped by paralysis and we have a cost of living crisis. Can he confirm now from that dispatch box that they will be forfeiting their right to this? Because we do not reward failure.
The matter that the Honourable Lady refers to is set in statute. So it is a matter for the law, and that law would have been passed by this House.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was an enormous honour to serve as a Minister of the Home Office until yesterday, tackling violence against women and girls. I know that's a cause that all members of this House care deeply about. While we are discussing these matters, victims of rape, sexual assault, stalking and spiking continue to deserve justice, and they will continue to be victims of crime. Will my right honourable friend give his continued support to the vital work of Operation Soteria and the rape review? Will he join me to put on record my thanks to Detective Chief Constable Maggie Blythe, Chief Constable Sarah Crew, Assistant Commissioner Louisa Robb and many other serving senior police officers who I know will capably continue to drive forward this work? And will he also thank the civil servants in the Home Office who I know will continue to do this essential work?
I understand it's good to get on record, but there's a lot of other people I'm going to try and get in. Minister.
I will do as she says, and I also commend her for her championship of this very important area. The rate review and the work thereof should, of course, continue.
Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been times, occasionally, when Prime Ministers have been temporarily incapacitated. There has never been a period in British history where a government has been incapacitated across every department of state. We've just heard how the secret services are being undermined by the current situation, putting national security at risk. At what point is the government going to actually start functioning again?
The government is functioning. I have already mentioned to the House that the great offices of state are still in place. He refers to our security and intelligence services. The Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary are in place.
Mr. Speaker, what provisions have been put in place for the continuing operation of the Partnership Council with the EU and the specialised committees over the coming months?
Well, I think he knows that I attended a meeting of the Partnership Council in Brussels recently. The functions of government, including in the international sphere, will continue apace.
Sir Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you'll be aware that before the House, before both houses, there are two major bills affecting Northern Ireland. One, the bill on the Northern Ireland Protocol, is the Prime Minister's own decision. The one on Northern Ireland Legacy is very much the now resigned Secretary of State's province. Can we have absolute clarity at this critical moment in the history of Northern Ireland and its relations with both the UK, the rest of the UK and Ireland, that we get some sense from this government about how we take these important matters forward?
Well, I'm particularly conscious, of course, of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, to which I think he is referring. The Leader of the House of Commons will be doing the usual business questions and answer session soon in this House.
Roberts.
Yes, the latest Conservative Party psychodrama only emphasises what many of us already know. The UK is a failed state. This government has shown contempt to devolution. The Prime Minister's successor will treat the electorate of Wales with the same disdain, and in this palace the circus will roll on. Does he surely not recognise that now is the time for a new constitutional settlement for these islands?
Well, she frequently traduces this country. I disagree with her and could not disagree with her more strongly. She has a separatist agenda, of course, and she wishes for the country to split. But in my view, this country is the greatest country on earth.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, on the anniversary of 7/7, security is of paramount importance to all of us in this House. With no security minister, a depleted cabinet, a Home Office that was struggling prior to this chaos, what assurances can the minister give us that the intelligence agencies are receiving all the full ministerial and legal engagement and sign-off in a timely way to keep us all safe?
I cannot discuss the security arrangements of this country from the dispatch box, but the Secretary of State for the Home Department is in place and is responsible for the arrangements appertaining to the security service of this country.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would suggest that the Paymaster General look up the meaning of functioning because his government is not it. Will the Paymaster General confirm whether the now former Secretary of State for Education will be getting the standard severance package for Secretary of State of 3 months' salary for a job she did for just 36 hours?
Matters such as pay and remuneration are set in statute. They are set in statute, not a matter for me.
Tim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The members of Parliament who have eventually forced out the Prime Minister have blindly stood by him during the no confidence vote, have not miraculously found their principles or their voices, but are doing so out of their own naked interest, self-interest. Does the Minister agree with me that a damaged and flailing Prime Minister should go immediately and not hang around like a bad smell until the Tory conference in autumn?
I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, but the business of government will continue functioning as normal.
Listen, Thulis.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to see the Paymaster General, one of the last remaining living crew on the ghost ship HMG. So in an effort to assist the burden of the skeleton crew that remain, would perhaps he like to arrange for the signing of a Section 30 order to begin the process of moving some of the functions of government to a fully functioning set of ministers in Holyrood?
No matter who forms the government of this country, the union of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is of paramount importance, as the people in Scotland themselves decided in the referendum in 2014.
Matt Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the current situation is clearly unsustainable. As we've heard earlier from my right honourable friend, it's damaging crucial decision-making and also it's harming our reputation abroad. Could the Minister please take this back to the Prime Minister and urge an urgent resolution and inform the House as soon as possible?
The Prime Minister will be speaking shortly.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, the idea of the Prime Minister continuing as a caretaker will be worrying many, many people. But it's interesting to hear from the BBC that MPs are privately briefing that they're worried about issues, maybe half jokingly, that the PM might take us to war to avoid leaving office. What are you going to do? What is going to be done to make sure that the opposition can hold a caretaking Prime Minister who has lost the faith of the country and his own government to account?
Now, I gently recommend to the Honourable Lady that she does not listen to gossip and rumour. The fact of the matter is that responsible government in this country will continue.
Mans.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with the resignation this morning of the Secretary of State for Education, following on from her entire Commons ministerial team, the Education Select Committee never even got to ask her about her plans. Mr. Speaker, it's become abundantly clear to almost the entire population that the only functioning cabinet that there's been in 10 Downing Street for months, if not for a few years, has been the drinks cabinet. So when will the remnants of this government's front bench accept that they've been in collective denial for just far too long?
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman asked a rhetorical question, but I would say to him this, that this government will continue to function as the country would expect.
Naz Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Looking at many Tory MPs in the lobbies and everywhere, looking at them, I'm using this word sadness. You know something, had it not been for the fact that each and every one of them on those benches upheld and let this Prime Minister carry on, he should have resigned. He should have resigned when Partygate happened. He should have resigned when Durhamgate happened. He should have resigned when his ethics advisor resigned. He should have resigned a long, long time ago. But each and every one of them kept him here, and now they're trying to take the moral high ground that he's finally on his way out. So I will not feel sorry for him. How do we hold them to account, Mr. Speaker, when there isn't a governing government? How does the opposition hold them to account?
The the people who put the Prime Minister in place are the 14 million people who voted in the general election for this Conservative Party.
Boris.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the greatest crises any of us can remember. And in the national interest, surely, even for a short period of time, till the recess, we should work across benches to sort this crisis. And I don't want any laughter here, Mr. Speaker, but I have a great deal of experience in education. There's no education minister on a short-term period. I will be very happy to help.
Unpaid, Mr. Speaker, unpaid. But our constituents would want us across benches to work together, forget this petty politics and get this government working again.
Yeah. Well, I thank the honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, but his services are not required. And the reason his services will not be required is because there are a plethora of talented and dedicated individuals on the benches behind me who will serve in this government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For many people in Scotland, the outgoing Prime Minister is Westminster personified, backward, unfit for purpose, delusional and disgraced. And now, just like the union he is the minister for, he is isolated, broken, bereft of ideas, and his time has come. The party is over. So can he tell me, will there be a leaving do in number 10 tonight? Because we'll be raising a drink in Coatbridge, Chrysler and Bellshill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's any serious answer expected from that frivolous question.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given a majority of government MPs now say the Prime Minister lacks the integrity and honesty required for that post, can the Minister explain what is the basis for the Prime Minister staying in post for a further 3 months?
I would recommend that the honourable gentleman awaits a statement which is due from the Prime Minister shortly.
Margaret Rayner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that our constituents contact us about extremely important matters, and they contact us when they've explored every other avenue to get a resolution to their problems. And we write to ministers on their behalf. And I'm extremely concerned on behalf of my constituents about what this means, not only for the casework that we have already sent to ministers, some of it of extreme importance for people's actual health and survival, but also going forward. It's untenable that the Prime Minister stays on until the autumn. Would the Minister please explain to me how it is that we can have a situation where there is no functioning government, but the Prime Minister thinks he can stay on?
Well, there is a functioning government and there's a functioning civil service who will continue to do their duty in supporting the operation and functionality of the state, as they always have done.
It's not to worry about the fact that a government elected with a majority of 82 years ago can carry on functioning because we have the civil service. But levelling up is a government priority. The bill enacting levelling up is in front of the House of Commons at the moment. If the government is functioning, can he tell us whether that committee is going ahead in 26 minutes' time?
Well, there is a business of the House statement in the usual way, and she will be able to ask that question of the Leader of the House of Commons.
Sam Terry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister speaks about responsible government, but yet we've had nearly 3 years of totally irresponsible government. My constituents are suffering massively. Surely, Mr. Speaker, the moral thing to do is not to look to the Constitution, but actually go to the country, call a general election and let the people of this country decide, not just on the Prime Minister, but on the rotten lot of bankrupt government that we've had for the past 2.5 years from the last election. It's not about the Constitution, it's about what the people of this country need, and that is responsible government, and they are not going to be getting it from your side, even with a change of Prime Minister.
The business of government will continue functioning as the public would expect it to do. And I reject the characterisation that he makes, and I suspect that the vast majority of the general public in this country would also reject that characterisation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
the Prime Minister should be making the statement in this House, frankly, not anywhere else, so that we could be able to question him about the functioning of government. And I think, Mr. Speaker, you'd prefer that as well. But let me just ask him this. There are two major crises facing the country at the moment. One is the cost of living crisis, which is facing many, many millions of families, and the other is the situation in Ukraine and across NATO. There's a real possibility that a government might have to deploy further troops in the next few months for proper reasons. A caretaker government can't do that. Simply can't. The rules forbid them from doing that. And yet, I fear that this Prime Minister, the disgraced, deselected Prime Minister, will be more dangerous in these next 3 months, if he's allowed to have another 3 months, than he's been in the last 3 years. So can he please make sure that we have a proper government soon? In other words, before the summer recess.
Well, we have a proper government, and the proper government continues. I have to say to the honourable gentleman that he talks about cost of living in Ukraine, but I have hardly heard him or his honourable colleagues speak of those subjects over the past 6 months. They have mostly been talking about personalities. So it is this government which has been getting on with the business of representing the United Kingdom in international fora and have led the way on Ukraine. And when it comes to dealing with the global cost of living crisis, have been doing that too.
Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, wow, what was that response to this urgent question? Mr. Speaker, is the Minister tired of propping up this Prime Minister and defending the indefensible? Minister, where was your letter? Did it get lost with your background?
I'm not answering any questions along those lines, Mr. Speaker.
We'll resign then.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today it appears a number of bill committees will be cancelled on issues of utmost importance, from national security to levelling up, as my honourable friend just raised, and tackling fraud, because there are no ministers to attend them. The Minister says the business of House will continue, but it will not. It obviously is not doing. Committees are being cancelled. In no other workplace would such crucial work go undone. Can the Minister explain why his Prime Minister and why his party think this is acceptable?
I'd say to the honourable lady, as I have said before, that when it comes to the legislative business of this House, that is a matter for the Leader of the House of Commons, who holds cabinet position and who is in place, and who is, within a short period of time, due to give his regularly scheduled weekly question and answer session, and she'll be able to take advantage of that in this House.
Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has brought his office into disrepute. Our country shouldn't have to put up with it any longer. Will the Prime Minister be leaving Number 10 this weekend?
Yeah. He will need to wait for the Prime Minister's statement later today.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Time reports this morning of Downing Street being like a bunker with gallows humour. This is no surprise, really, given the track record of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is now set on staying in post until summer. Now, if this happens, is the Minister concerned about what further damage the Prime Minister will do?
The honourable member will need to wait for the Prime Minister's statement later today. I cannot preempt what the Prime Minister's statement will be.
Emma Lowbat.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Away from this place, our constituents are waiting for answers from this government. My constituents, Lisa and Mark Rutherford and Caroline Curry, had their precious children taken from them in the Manchester Arena terror attack. Due to archaic legislation, they can't register their deaths. The Justice Department advised an answer on a possible change to this legislation was imminent. Since the government has collapsed, who will give them an answer and when?
I'm very sorry to hear of the appalling bereavement suffered by her constituents, and it's an unimaginable loss. And I would like the honourable member to convey my sympathies and the sympathies of the entire government for that. With regard to her question, the functioning of government continues. The civil service supports ministers in place. Ministers are in place to support the functioning of necessary government. That will continue.
Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I point out to the Minister that we do in fact have functioning government within the United Kingdom. We have a functioning government in Edinburgh and we have a functioning government in the Senedd, in Cardiff. And where government does not function across these islands, in Westminster and in Northern Ireland, they have one thing in common, and it's the dead malign hand of this Tory government. So what possible confidence can the people of these islands, the people who want to stay in this broken union and the millions of us who don't, what confidence can we have in who is coming next? Because they all stood by and watched what this Prime Minister did for 6 months or more.
It is the Westminster government that represents this country, and the Union of the United Kingdom will continue apace, despite his opposition to it.
John Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister praises the civil service while planning to cut 91,000 of them.
Yeah.
I echo his praise, but they cannot be expected to cover for the lack of ministers, or for that matter, for the British people's lack of confidence in this dysfunctional government.
Yeah.
So, will the Minister say, will the missing ministers be replaced?
Yes.
And does he accept that they are all tainted by the Prime Minister's disgrace, and what is needed is a fresh start?
Ministerial appointments are not a matter for me, but the functioning of government will continue apace.
Rachel Master.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 18 minutes' time, I am due to sit on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill Committee as set out on the order paper. The Leader of the House won't be before the Parliament at that point. There are no ministers, there is no Secretary of State, and there is a Prime Minister in office but not in government. So can the Paymaster General let me know if that committee is going ahead in now 17 minutes and when it is due to recommence, if not?
I'm unable to answer the honourable member's question. The committees of this House will continue in the normal way of business.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The majority of people who left the government have referred to the Prime Minister's lack of integrity, honour, honesty and competence. They surely can't return to work for such a man, even on a temporary basis. So to get a functioning government, we need a full set of ministers. We need a swift transition. Will he at least convey that message to Number 10 and to his cabinet colleagues?
It is up to each individual to decide how best to serve in government or not, and the functioning of government can and will continue. There are a multitude of ministers and a plethora of items on agendas which will continue to be dealt with the support, as I've said, of the civil service, having spoken this morning, as I've told the House, to the Cabinet Secretary.
Jim Shannon.
I wasn't here.
No. Right. There we are. Minute. We're really settled.